Good afternoon. We're convening the Senate Committee on Transportation on our 3 p.m. agenda here in State Capitol Conference Room 224 and online. We have a number of bills up on the agenda today, as well as bills for decision-making carried over from our last hearing. So we'll be asking folks to limit their testimony to 2 minutes to make sure that we can get through everyone who's signed up to testify. Also, in the event that we lose connection, we'll be rolling everything over to our next agenda on Tuesday at 3:01 p.m. here in this room, as well as online. So up first today is HB 486, House Draft 2, relating to transportation, which specifies that a government agency does not assume ownership or jurisdiction over a disputed road through any maintenance or repair activities, and authorizes state transfers. Testifying first is DLNR.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Russell Tsuji for DLNR. We'll stand on our testimony with providing comments and available for questions if you have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Department of Transportation.
Good afternoon, Chair Lee and members of the committee. Jay Butay for DOT. We stand on our testimony in support.
Thank you. And we did have one additional comment from DLNR from Kevin Moore. I'm not sure if it's the same division within DLNR.
Yes, sorry, Chair, it's the same testimony.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's all the testimony we have on 486. Are there any questions? If not, all right, thank you, everybody. Let's move on to the next measure, House Bill 1062 HD2, relating to commercial driver's licenses. This clarifies the validity period for a commercial learner's permit and adds a requirement for certain commercial driver's license applicants to complete an entry-level driver training course. And testifying first on 1062 is DOT.
Thank you, Chair. We stand on our testimony in support. States that fail to implement these requirements can be penalized by withholding federal funds. Are estimated that 6.1 million in the first year for non-compliance and 12.3 million in the second year and subsequent years for Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have the Hawaii Transportation Association in support. That's all the testimony we have on this measure. Are there any questions? If not, thank you very much. Let's move on to House Bill 95, relating to special license plates for natural resources, which authorizes the issuance of special license plates for raising funds for the state's natural resources. Testifying first on HB 95 is DLNR. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Jason Reedlua for DLNR. The department stands on its written testimony in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is, we have 2 additional testimonies in support from 2 individuals. That's all the testimony we have. Are there any questions? If not, thank you. Let's move on to the next measure, HB 775, relating to renaming Kahului Airport Access Road after Mayor Elmer Carvalho. Excuse me. And testifying first on 775 is DOT.
Law Chair, we stand on our submitted written testimony in support of the intent of the bill. However, we recommend that the more appropriate method would be to pass a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next is County of Maui Mayor Mike Victor. Excuse me, dying over here. It's not COVID though, promise. Mayor's office in support. 1 individual in opposition, and Mr. Evangelista, I believe, is with us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm in support of renaming the airport access way to the Mayor Elmer Carvalho Way, and I think this is probably the best road to rename after the mayor, because when you come to the end of Airport Access Way, as you go forward, it's the road to Wailea and Kanapali, which is basically the route going to the tourist areas on Maui, that the mayor wanted tourism to focus there. And if you go to the left, it's Punene, the site of the old sugar plantations. And if you go to the right, it's Dream City, where the plantation workers got the property because the plantations were phasing out. And also I want to note that if you go further left, past Punene, there's the old Veterans Highway, which was renamed from Mokulele Highway by the legislature. So I think that this would be the most appropriate place to, most appropriate street to rename after Mayor Carvalho, who's done a lot for the county of Maui and was the first Speaker of the House post-statehood.
Thank you very much. That's all the testimony we have on this measure. Are there any questions? All right, if not, thank you all very much. Let's move on to the next measure. Oh, I'm sorry, real quick, still on 775, DOT. In your testimony, you just noted a resolution, but should a bill pass, that would also get the job done, right?
Yeah, we usually have done renaming via resolution, Senator.
Understand. Just want to make sure that there's not a legal issue we could run into. Okay, moving on to the next measure. Oh, sorry, any other questions on that one while we're still on it? If not, let's move on to the next measure, House Bill 1321, relating to transportation, which requires the posting of depth gauge signs in a manner consistent with the Federal Highway Administration's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices on any portion of a public highway that lies within a special flood zone. And testifying first on 1321 is Ha'ima. In support, Department of Transportation.
We stand on our testimony in support, Chair.
Thank you. And we also have one individual in support. That's all the testimony we have. Are there any questions on this measure? Right, if not, thank you. Let's go on to, oh, I did have one question, sorry, for DOT. We had reached out starting to have a conversation about this, but I'll just note this bill does include a blank appropriation. Should there be no money available this year for this particular measure, would DOT have access to other funds to potentially carry out its intent?
No, I mean, we have so much, we have more projects than we have funding, so we would want we would want the money, but we will do what we can to, put the gauges.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions on this measure, let's move on to the next measure, House Bill 1090, relating to child passenger restraints, which amends requirements for child passengers and requires rear-facing child safety seats for children less than 2 years of age, and requires the use of child safety seats or booster seats for certain children under 10. And testifying first on 1090 is the Department of Transportation.
Hello, Chair. We stand on our testimony in support, adopting this child restraint requirements will reduce motor vehicle fatalities and serious injuries. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next on 1090 is the Honolulu Police Department.
Good afternoon, Chair. Major Calvin Tom, the Honolulu Police Department. We stand by a testimony in support of this bill.
Thank you. We have testimony in support from the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. Also, Keiki Injury Prevention Coalition.
Karen Tessier testifying for Keiki Injury Prevention Coalition. We stand on our testimony in support of this bill, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Up next is Kapiolani Medical Center for Women and Children.
Hi, Lisa Dow with Kapiolani Medical Center, and we support and stand by our testimony.
Thank you. Up next, Hawai'i Association for Justice.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Nahalani Webster, testifying on behalf of Hawai'i Association for Justice in opposition to this measure. I just want to clarify that our opposition is really only specific to one section in the bill, and I just want to explain that a little bit. We're absolutely in support of the proper use of child passenger restraints, and we appreciate the legislature's attempt to strengthen this through the bill. There is we recommend leaving in statute section D regarding contributory negligence. The reason for this is an example of if a drunk driver was to hit a family who was stopped at a stoplight, if for some reason that child had accidentally or unintentionally unbuckled their seatbelt, the drunk driver has the potential to argue that the parents were 100% at fault. In that situation, I feel like we want to be able to hold the person who caused the injury at fault. And so it's really a technical language. I wanted to clarify that it's currently in statute, and our recommendation to the committee is to keep that section D in order for that whoever is causing that injury to be held responsible. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and available if anyone has questions.
Thank you. Up next, AAA Hawai'i in support, and the Juvenile Products Manufacturers Association with comments. That's all the testimony we have. Are there any questions? Okay. If not, thank you. Let's move on to House Bill 264 HD1 relating to transportation network companies, which makes permanent insurance requirements for transportation network companies and drivers. And testifying first on 264 is the Hawaii Insurers Council. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman. This is Allison Ueoka, Hawaii Insurers Council. We'll stand on our testimony and support. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Uber. In support, American Property Casualty Insurance Association. In support, and Lyft. In support. That's all the testimony we have on 264. Are there any questions? Okay, if not, thank you. Let's move on to the last measure on our first agenda, HB 72, relating to electric foot scooters, which establishes a framework for the regulation of electric foot scooters by the state and counties and amends definitions of moped. And testifying first on HB 72 is the Hawaii State Energy Office. Looks like in support, Department of Transportation. Also in support, Honolulu Police Department.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members, Major Walter Ozeki, Honolulu Police Department. We stand on a written testimony in support of this bill, and we're available for questions.
Thank you. Up next, Honolulu, it's like Department of Transportation Services. Good afternoon. You know, for some reason, I don't know if the audio just cut out, but we're unable to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There you are.
Great. Thank you, Chair, for hearing this measure. This is Drake Lee from the Honolulu Department of Transportation Services. We stand in very strong support of the measure and are available for questions. Thank you.
We have up next Waikiki Neighborhood Board in support. County of Kauai in support as well. It took out of order. Spin.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Lee, members of the Senate Transportation Committee and staff. My name is Brianna Bledsoe, Senior Public Policy Manager for SPIN, and we are excited to support HB 72 HD2, which will make Hawaii the 47th state to legalize electric foot scooters. We stand on a written testimony with comments, and I do want to note that a recent study by Emory University found that shared e-scooters can generate significant positive economic impacts, particularly for small businesses. Specifically, there was $921 in incremental spending per available e-scooter for food and beverage companies. We do hope that the bill passes because we are excited about the opportunity to bring a safe, affordable, and accessible form of green transportation to the islands, particularly as we navigate the pandemic. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Lime.
Good afternoon, Chair. In addition to noting what Brianna just said, like for every 1,000 scooters would contribute $1 million in free economic development to the city, primarily to the restaurant industry. We think that's important to note, and otherwise stand on our written testimony to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have testimony from Hellbiz in support, and one individual. And that's all the testimony we have on this measure. Are there any questions? All right, if not, then that's the last measure on our first agenda. I'll note we do have one more agenda of carryover DM measure. So why don't we just take a quick, let's say, 3-minute recess, and we'll come back for decision making. Recess. Thank you. We're reconvening the Committee on Transportation for decision-making on our 3 o'clock and 3:01 p.m. agendas. Up first is HB 486, relating to transportation, which specifies that a government agency does not assume ownership or jurisdiction over disputed roads. Recommendation on this is to pass as is. Any discussion? If not, I'll vote aye. Vice Chair is excused. Senator English?
Aye.
Senator Shimabukuro?
Aye.
And Senator Favela?
Aye.
Thank you. Measure is adopted. Moving on to the next measure, HB 1062, relating to commercial driver's licenses, which clarifies the validity period for a commercial learner's permit and adds certain requirements pursuant to federal requirements. Recommendation is to move this on as is so we don't fall out of compliance with federal requirements. So recommendation is passed as is. Oh, excuse me, tech amendments, SD1. Also be passing with amendments, noting all members present with the exception of the Vice Chair who's excused. Are there any reservations or any no's? If not, everybody votes yes, and measure is adopted. Up next is HB 95, HD2, relating to special license plates for natural resources, which authorizes the issuance of special license plates for conservation protection. Recommendation is passed as is. Any discussion? If not, noting the excused absence of the Vice Chair, are there any reservations or no's? If not, measure is adopted. Thank you. Up next, HB 775, relating to renaming Kahului Airport Access Road, which renames the road after the former mayor and speaker. Recommendation is to pass as is. Noting any discussion on this? If not, noting excused absence of the Vice Chair, are there any reservations or no's? If not, measure is adopted. Moving on to HB 1321, relating to transportation, which requires the posting of depth gauge signs pursuant to FHA standards. Recommendation is to move this on, just removing the blanked appropriation, and noting it does have a defective date of 2050. Any discussion on this one? If not, noting excused absence of the Vice Chair, are there any reservations or no's? If not, measure is adopted. Okay, HB 1090, HD1, relating to child passenger restraints, which amends requirements for child passengers and requires rear-facing child safety seats for children less than 2, and makes other amendments. Recommendation is to move this on as well, adopting the Hawaii Association for Justice recommendation, leaving 291.11.5D, or excuse me, addressing 291.11.5D as they recommended in their testimony relating to negligence. Also noting this has a 2050 defective date. Recommendation is to move this on with that amendment. Any discussion on this? If not, noting excused absence of the vice chair, are there any reservations or noes? If not, thank you, everybody. The recommendations adopted. Moving on to HB 264, relating to transportation network companies, which makes permanent insurance requirements for TNCs and TNC drivers. Our recommendation is to move this forward, adopting some amendments, noting the Senate moved out a similar bill with amendments, which was SB 251 SD2, whose contents we would like to adopt and reflect in this measure. So we'll be adopting the Senate position and also keeping in the defective date of 2050. So any discussion on this? If not, noting the excused absence of the vice chair, are there any reservations or noes? And if not, thank you. Measure is adopted. Lastly, for this agenda, HB 72 HD2 relating to electric foot scooters, which establishes a framework for regulating electric foot scooters. Recommendations to move this forward as well, making just a couple amendments similar to what was done in the Senate bill, which just adds a more explicit requirement for county authorization of where these may be stored. And secondly, ensuring that funds raised from the measure as outlined in the bill go into the Bikeway Fund under 249-17.5. And finally, 3, just some tech amendments. Any discussion on this one? If not, we'll scoot it on its way. Noting the excused absence of the vice chair, any reservations or noes? If not, measure is adopted. Okay, so that is the 3 p.m. agenda. So let's go into the 3:01 p.m. DM agenda. These measures were previously heard in this committee. Up first is House Bill 333 HD3 relating to peer-to-peer car sharing, which authorizes peer-to-peer car sharing and establishes a surcharge tax on the operator of the peer-to-peer program. We'll note that this goes to JDC and WAM next. So we do need to move this out ASAP to make sure it gets, it meets the procedural requirements for later hearings. But we did want to make a couple amendments here. We'll note that we were reached out to by some of the stakeholders who are working collectively on a fix for the insurance provisions that were raised in the committee hearing. But they did let us know that they're not going to have those done by this DM right now. So what we'd like to do is note in the committee report that that is the case, and hope that by the time this gets to the next hearing, they'll have whatever that language is that can be inserted. So we'll note that in the committee report. In the meantime, as a placeholder, we'll just add in the recommendation of the insurance commissioner pursuant to this discussion that's happening with the stakeholders. So we'll have something in there that we can refer to in the committee report. Other than that, I'll note it does have a defective date, so we'll be able to return to this later, and it'll go on to JDC WAM. So any discussion on that? If not, noting the excused absence of the vice chair, are there any reservations in this measure or any noes? If not, recommendation is adopted. Thank you, everyone. And then finally, HB 273 HD1 relating to license renewals, which allows the Department of Transportation to adopt emergency rules to allow for license renewals to be completed by mail or online. We'd like to move this forward as well, noting that we want to clarify the language in an amendment. So clarify that DOT can adopt rules to allow for broad written renewals without the need for individuals to make that request specifically, which I think there's a little bit of confusion on, since this is obviously a response to the pandemic and the widespread need statewide for everybody to be able to get their licenses renewed remotely. So this will ensure that beyond any shadow of a doubt, DOT can do this broadly without having to go through traditional request by individuals for that ability. So with that, recommendation is to pass with amendments. Noting the excused absence of the vice chair, are there any reservations or any noes? If not, everyone votes yes, and the measure is adopted. All right, thank you, everybody. That concludes our hearing today. 34 minutes. We're making good progress. Appreciate it.